Hello and welcome to this Autovista24 webinar, the EV subsidies gamble, impact on new and used car markets. I'm Phil Curry, editor of Autovista24, and if we look at today's agenda and the topics that we will be discussing, we are going to be looking at the state of Europe's EV market, the market conundrum, new cars versus used cars, what we can learn from the Norwegian market, which is leading in EV sales, followed by a quick summary and a Q&A session as well. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a box marked questions. Feel free to ask any questions in there and we will put them to our experts at the end of this in a 10-minute session. Any questions we don't get around to, don't worry, we will try and answer those after this session has ended. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you will have come to this webinar through Autovista24, and you'll probably know what it is already. But for the fair few out there who don't, we have some details now on screen, an essential automotive multimedia platform. Now, multimedia is key there. We also have a podcast and we have a YouTube channel. And it is on the YouTube channel that you can find this presentation, this webinar, after it is finished. We'll also be making the slides available to you all as well. So don't worry about taking notes, don't worry about missing any important topics. They will be available to you after the webinar is over. But of course, we want you to be listening and making sure that you get the information exclusively firsthand. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. We have Dr. Christoph Engelsgerschen, who is Chief Economist of Autovista Group, Roland Eil, who is Managing Director of EV Volumes, Robert Madas, Head of Valuations and Insights in Austria, Czech and Poland, and Geir Kristoffersen, who is Managing Director of Reboka in Norway. Thank you all for joining me. So we'll move on to our first section, which is the state of Europe's EV market. But before we do that, actually, we'll have a quick survey. Sorry, I'm getting my notes mixed up there. I'd like to know your views and your opinions. How concerned are you about the remarketing of used EVs, BEVs and FEVs in Europe? Are you very concerned? Do you expect an oversupply of EVs? Mildly concerned, an oversupply in some countries only? Not concerned? Do you think EV residual value is already at an all-time low? Or quite the opposite? Do you think EV remarketing is not a concern to you? I'll let you give you a little bit of time to put your opinions on screen. I'll be interested to see your answers and see where we come through. So we'll let that run for a little bit. I could already see some interesting opinions coming through. I have another 10 seconds on that. And there we go. So as we can see, many of you are mildly concerned, 55% of you in that respect. Very concerned, an oversupply of EVs, will 18% second, and then not concerned, quite close. But only a few of you are also thinking quite the opposite. EV remarketing is not a concern. Some quite interesting, some interesting thoughts there actually, and that kind of leads to the reason why we're running this webinar today, to really look at the conundrum, at the problem of incentives, if it is indeed a problem. So, as I got ahead of myself earlier on, we'll go back into our first section, State of Europe's EV Market, and I would like to ask Roland a few questions. Hi, Roland. My first question to you is, how have EV sales improved in recent months?
Okay. The chart shows the development of 2021 first half versus 2020 first half. I just want to go back to 2020 a little bit. It was a special year because of the pandemic, but it was also the year when electric vehicles really took off in Europe, while the overall vehicle market in Western and Central Europe was down 24% compared to 2019. EV sales were up 138% during that period. So EVs proved to be very resilient to this market downturn, and they actually tripled their market share from 3.3% to over 10% in the last year. Now back to the graphic. it shows the development of 2021 versus 2020 first half year, and we can see that the boom continues. This is showing also regions outside Europe. In Europe, EV sales were up 157% in the first half, and the total markets recovered by plus 29% during that period, albeit compared to the weak numbers of the first half of 2020, when the first wave of the pandemic was raging and we had a lot of lockdowns. Now the developments outside Europe are likewise impressive. We have almost 200% growth in China, 166% in the US, 40% in Japan, which has been in decline for 3 years previous, and 95% in all the other countries and regions, which are not in the other 4 shown. EV sales increased 3 to 8 times faster than the total vehicle markets recovered during that period. So the EV uptake is strong everywhere at the moment, and it's driven by more accessible and affordable, more attractive EV offers, CO2 mandates, higher taxation benefits, a faster expanding infrastructure, and also I would say a higher consciousness for environmental issues and health. Now for the second half of 2021, the growth rates in percent will come down, of course, because the numbers will compare to the much higher base of the second half of last year when markets were already in recovery. But the growth rates will still be impressive worldwide. We are expecting 6.4 million EV sales. This is battery electric and plug-in hybrids, which is double the number of 2020. And for Europe, we expect sales of roughly 2.5 million, which is an increase of 77% over 2020. This is in a car market in Europe which is still very weak. Some of our latest numbers, August sales, for instance, were 20% lower than August last year, and 25% lower than a normal August, means the average of 2015 to 2019, for instance. So the markets are still weak, but EV sales were up in August 56%, and they actually reached 24% of car sales in the top 10 markets, and 24% is a very high number, including light commercial vehicles and including all the other markets in Western and Central Europe. I think we are at 20% market share now in Europe sales, and half of them are fully electric, the other half is plug-in hybrids.
And can we look forward as well? What's the forecast for by the end of the decade, by 2030?
Our forecast is that by 2030, 2/3 of all vehicles sold will be electrically chargeable, and BEVs will gain share in the mix, and by 2030 stand for approximately 85% of total EV sales. Plug-in hybrids will still increase from the 1.2 million we will see this year to a peak of 1.5 million in 2030 and decline afterwards. So we see BEVs to be much likely the end game for a variety of reasons like the simplicity of their powertrains, cost reduction potentials, vehicle design opportunities, for instance, standardization, advantages in performance, in comfort, in safety, roominess, weight, NVH. They haven't all been realized yet, but the industry is learning. Then service and running costs, they're already beating the ICE and PHEV competition. And yeah, the higher impact on fleet CO2, subsidies and tax exemptions favoring BEVs and ICE bans altogether.
Okay.
And then we also see that the future portfolios of European OEM are clearly favoring or prioritizing battery electric vehicles, pure electric vehicles for the future.
Okay. Christoph, if I can come to you, do you think that it's likely we'll see a decline in PHEV sales, in plug-in hybrid sales, as BEV models become more popular?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question, Phil. There are certainly a lot of factors influencing the speed of adoption. And on the chart on your screen, you can see several countries and regions, and the colorful bars always show BEV versus PHEV market share, and the line shows the share of EV among total car registrations. And if we leave the main hygiene factors such as infrastructure and suitability for daily use aside just for a second, the main reason for speed of adoption is incentives that drive transaction prices down, or more specifically, the total cost of ownership is favorable for EVs in those markets where the sales are rising. I mean, that's the current market reality. And without such strong purchase incentives or tax benefits, and there's a variety of incentives available, the total cost of ownership would be unfavorable for the EV technology, and there wouldn't be a significant market share either for BEV or for PHEV, so plug-in or BEV. Now, I wanted to look at two markets a bit more specifically to talk about the difference in market share and adoption speed for BEV and PHEV. So let's look at Norway, which is on the bottom right on this chart. First, this is a market that is very EV mature, and it has become mature on the back of very high benefits for choosing an electric vehicle over an internal combustion engine vehicle. But still, in this market, and if you look at the black line, which is closing in almost to 80% on the bottom right, there's still 20% of cars which are non-electric. And of those which are electric, so on the bottom right, the bars show that 80% of cars are battery electric and 20% are PHEVs. And that's my first answer to your question. So that should give us a bit of an indication of what is possible under today's market conditions for the EV market, if a market is really pushing this technology. And Roland was, I think, at 85% BEV share for Europe by 2030, 50% PHEV. So I think that's a figure that we could anticipate. And now I want to pick a second market just to make another point here, which I think is important. If you look at Germany, which is on the bottom in the middle, you can see that there is a very, very strong and big market share for PHEVs. It's almost 50% of the EVs that have been registered in Germany are PHEVs, and that has clearly been driven by very strong incentives. The market is emphasizing PHEV purchasing a bit too much, and has realized that it's creating a skewed picture in terms of EV adoption. And they have announced now that eligibility for PHEVs will be tougher going forward. So again, 50% PHEV is current reality in Europe. That's going to come down more realistically around 20% PHEV, 80% BEV by 2030 is a realistic scenario.
And one last question before we move on. Will further incentives be needed for BEVs to remain popular?
I mean, I believe that a very, very strong industrial policy is a prerequisite for EV adoption. And that industrial policy will also continue to create unfavorable conditions for the ICE technology. We see this happening across Europe. And in terms of your question, do we need further incentives? I think they will have to come down at some point, but on the back of OEMs scaling the technology so that they can lower the list prices in turn. And only then can TCO profiles continue to be attractive for the electric vehicle. And to give you some concrete numbers, we're looking at scenarios where the BEV prices would come down by 20–25% in order to compensate for a lack of incentives, or when incentives are being phased out.
Christoph, Rodden, thank you very much. We'll move on now to our next section, the market adoption conundrum. Here I'm going to address Robert, you first. What is the outlook for internal combustion engine, ICE versus BEV versus PHEV in say 2 key markets in Europe, say Germany and the UK?
Like we've heard before from Roland and Christoph, there are impressive numbers on the new car markets, where we have seen a quick adoption of EVs in the past 2 years. So that's not only true for the UK and Germany, but however, on the used car markets, EVs still play only a marginal role. The market share on the used car markets currently is around 1%, maybe 2%, depending on the specific market, of all used car registrations. So today, especially young used EVs are not as attractive due to the incentives for new EVs. So the demand is also rather low, and supply is not so high at the moment. However, we believe this will change. From 2023 and beyond, I think the volume of BEVs and PHEVs being defleeted into used car markets will be rather large due to the recent spike in registrations. And if we now look at the development of asking prices of used cars, we can see a typical trend, and it's displayed on this chart. This example is from Austria, but it applies similarly to key markets like Germany or the UK and other European markets, only at different levels. We can see that asking prices in the used car market already have increased steadily since mid of last year. And on average, asking prices are well above pre-coronavirus levels. We're talking here about 7 to 10% above for diesel cars and also petrol cars. However, BEVs show a different development. They have been under pressure and are only now stabilizing, and they are even below the levels of the pre-pandemic era. PHEVs have shown a better performance than BEVs, but they are still well below ICE cars. And furthermore, now with high government incentives for new EVs, we think that this will affect used car values in the future due to the risk of supply and demand imbalance. So this is the way we think the markets are heading now.
Okay. And what challenges do BEVs and PHEVs face in markets with high incentives?
Firstly, there is this risk of supply-demand imbalance on used car markets due to high incentives for new car registrations. And a second point is still the shorter life cycle of EVs. The technology is aging faster than for internal combustion engines. So today, a 3 or 4 year old BEV and also PHEV is not as attractive from a technology point of view as a new one. Especially given the high incentives that we see for new EVs currently.
Okay. Christoph, actually, I'd like to get your opinion on that as well. What challenges do you think that BEVs and PHEVs face in markets with high incentives?
I think the situation for BEVs is driven by very high incentives, but it also shows that we've hit a point where they really can't fall off a cliff any further, right? Because a lot of influence factors are driving this performance down. So there's infrastructure challenges, there is the technology aging challenge. All of this will be worked on. All of this will improve. So I think for BEVs in many markets, we think that there isn't so much downside potential anymore because the values are already at a very low level. For PHEV, it will be a bit different depending on markets. So there may be markets where there's an oversupply driven by very high incentives, for example, in Germany, and those cars eventually will have to be exported across to other markets in order to not realize a loss if they're marketed in in Germany alone. But that's, I mean, that's something that, you know, those holding the risk are completely aware of and capable of doing. I think we need to mention one positive aspect here with all the risks. Portfolios of the banks and leasing companies have never been more diversified than today, and they will get even more diversified in the future. And with diesel and petrol RVs rising, and they will continue to develop favorably over the next years as there is an undersupply on used car markets and still high demand on used car markets, they can be quite a great chance to make a lot of profits in remarketing, compensating for a bit of a turmoil here and there for the electric vehicles. But they are representative of only 1 to 2% in used car market volumes at the moment.
Now, Robert, as demand for new BEVs grows, especially due to external pressures, for example, bans coming into place, CO2 targets, and the push to net zero by some companies, what does this do to residual values, and how will this continue in the future? Will it get better? Will it get worse?
So as Christoph already mentioned, there are a lot of factors in favor of this new technology and somehow stabilizing also the hygiene factors around the technology. However, one decisive factor is the supply side. And with the spike in registrations now, there will be a lot of cars hitting the used car markets in the next years. A lot of BEVs and FEVs. And the question will be if the demand for these cars on the used car market can be generated, or if the demand will stay on a low level like today, because then RVs will be badly affected. If there are enough factors to also stimulate demand on the used car markets, then the risk will be mitigated by those factors. So I think it's a risky situation from the supply side, but on the other hand, as Christoph mentioned, on the demand side, used car markets usually are also following new car markets with a lag in time of a couple of years, and we will also see those demand factors on used car markets in the next years.
Now, for OEMs who are looking to launch a battery electric vehicle in the next 2 years, what are the points? What do they need to consider when doing so?
I think generally they need to consider the balance of volumes on the used car markets. And we have now seen some recent examples of how OEMs tackle this challenge. Just a couple of weeks ago, Volkswagen Financial Services, for example, announced that they will take around 3,000 ID3s and ID4s into subscription channels. Previously, those cars would have hit the used car market as young used cars. So they try to put less volumes on the used car market. And even after this subscription period, these cars should go into the used car leasing and not on the used car market for sale, according to the announcement that we have heard a couple of weeks ago. So you can see that they try to stabilize prices on the used car market by putting less volumes on used car markets.
And for fleet managers with both BEVs and FEVs on their books, what should they be thinking about today and in the next 12 months?
As I explained before, I think there is a risk associated with the supply-demand imbalance on used car markets, so it would be good to make provisions for this risk. But as we have heard also before from Christoph, there is a positive note also, and that's the diversified portfolios, and the performance of used diesel and petrol cars may also compensate to some extent for the negative impact that we might see on EV prices in the next years. But as a bottom line, I think to have this risk on the radar and to keep a close eye on different developments like EV technology developments, charging technology developments, but also market figures, new and used car registrations, RV developments in specific markets. I think that's good to have on the radar these days.
Right. Robert, Christoph, again, thank you for your contributions there. Before we move on to our next section, I just want to just confirm again that this session is being recorded. Slides and the video will be made available to you afterwards, and you can also find the video on the Autovista24 YouTube channel. Just head to YouTube and search for Autovista24. We'll now move on to our final section before our Q&A. which is the learnings from Norway. Now, yeah, we'll come to you. Norway is sometimes seen as a poster country, shall we say, for EV adoption in Europe, with constantly high registration figures. But how has the high registration figures, especially of battery electric vehicles, been achieved?
Yeah, hi Phil. Yeah, it has been achieved, by I would say a massive benefit given to the Norwegian population from the authorities. And it's Norway, where we are in a specific situation where we had approximately 100% tax on ICE models. So the officials of the government, were actually giving away a lot of tax money to people than buying electric cars. So I think Norway, the politicians there, they decided that they needed to kickstart this market. So they made a target that by 2025 there will be actually no ICE models sold from the dealerships in Norway. Of course, there will be imports, but not so many. And given the number that we've seen from Christoph and this presentation, that we are on a good way to achieving this. So there's no doubt in this that the benefits that has been given to the population for buying battery electric and also PHEV models is the real cause behind this. I would say success then, because it's been a spoken target from the politicians to achieve this, and now there is about 10% left really who is buying the ICE model, and that's based on the topology of the country, because it started out in 11, 12 and so on with the urban populated areas where there were so many benefits given to people who wanted to buy a Leaf at that time, and there were done several kind of surveys about this, and the most important was not actually the price or the environmental effect, but the fact that they can drive in the taxi line, so could get commuting very much efficient and by using their old Golf, so they tend then to buy a newer electric car. So yeah, this is the explanation behind. Also, I would say that the car associations and the electrical car associations, they've been working very closely with officials and in many aspects in society to build charging facilities, which is of course very important to achieve these high numbers. So even though we are building and we are going to strengthen the investment in charging facilities, we are behind. The need is higher than we can fill today. So we saw this actually very clearly last summer, where a lot of the people not driving in Europe, not going anywhere actually, just driving in Norway, that there was a huge problem getting to a charging facility and to be able to charge. Also, there has been technical things with how you pay for charging. There's a lot of difficult and different solutions. So that then you need to be having this specific app to do this charging. So we are now working on a standard solution, mostly then by credit card, we hope, to pay for your charging. So yeah, a lot of things has been done right, and I think it's a political will, and they have been successful.
And you mentioned obviously the incentives and various incentives involved, but incentives obviously on BEV sales, how have they impacted the residual values of used models?
Yeah, in the beginning it was interesting, because then you would find the most selling model at the time on top of the list for sales, and the funny thing that the price will be 10% higher than the listing price of the car. So this has changed. So given the fact that we now are on about 70% volume for new car sales registration for the battery electric, we see that given the amount of variety of products that has coming into the market the latest 2 years, and we see them still coming, that it has led to that the older, 15 and so on models is difficult to sell, and it has affected the residual value, not dramatically, but it will. We expect that to increase further on. But
So,
we also, sorry, Phil, just to add, if you're looking for a newer ICE model, then you would actually be on the good side if you have something to sell, because those, again, given the topology of the country, looking for a 2 years old XC40 with a specific petrol or diesel engine, you could actually achieve a very good price for that car.
Fair enough. Fair enough. ICE isn't too bad. Now, you mentioned a couple of points there. I'm really keen to get your view. What do you think that Europe can learn from Norway? Obviously, you mentioned about the need for increased charging infrastructure, the various different incentives and the impacts that they're having. So what do you think Europe can take from Norway's, should we say, success in BEV popularity?
Yes, what can they learn? I mean, given the situation that Norway is in a very strong financial situation, so we could actually afford to do what we did. I mean, lowering the tax on the electric and battery, BEV models. I think what we see also is that investment from private corporations into charging infrastructure, that has to be put forward by the officials, so it's easy to invest and to build out these facilities. And we also see that what we call soft benefits, like lower price on parking, lower price on toll roads, is helpful to achieve a growth. And then of course the situation that we already have been promised now for years, that the only way that the CO2 tax will go is up. So I think that's something that Europe can learn also, that you have to make it very expensive to buy an ICE model.
Brilliant. Roland, again, thank you very much. Also, Geir, thank you very much for your thoughts there. Okay, that brings us to our Q&A session. But before we go into this, I just want to give you a quick summary of some of the key points we've taken from today. The market share of EVs in Europe has largely grown on the back of incentives. Many countries are offering them in order to increase BEV popularity. The incentives in Europe are substantial, they're inconsistent, and they create challenges for remarketing. It can cause oversupply, issues of oversupply, and pressure on residual values. EV technology ages faster than ICE, and this will continue to affect RVs. We see differences in ranges, for example. We see differences in battery times, battery charging times. Incentives will combine to be the driving force for EV adoption unless list prices come down. This needs to be combined with other measures as well. And finally, demand for used EVs must be stimulated, e.g. with incentives or other benefits. So now we'll move into our Q&A session. We've got around 10 minutes for this. We've had a few questions come in. Now, the first question I'd like to ask our panel is, how will residual values of modern or vehicles that were launched in the last 12 months on an EV platform compare to residual values of combustion engine vehicles, for example, in 3 to 5 years? Robert, could I come to you for that one?
Sure. That's a really good question, because on the chart that I've shown before, we have seen like the average, and we have seen the current basket of models that is on offer from week to week. But if we dig into detail and if we dig deeper here, we can see that already today modern EVs, 12 months old EVs, they have pretty high RVs compared to diesel and petrol cars. In some markets, in some cases, they are even above, in percentage terms, above diesel and petrol cars. And we see a problem for RVs more for the older generations, so for EVs that are 36 months old or even older. This might continue in the next years to some extent, so this picture will not change completely, But of course, as the technology advances, the gap will also be closed at some point, and the RV scenarios will be more similar to what we know from diesel and petrol cars since the last years. But today and in the next 1 or 2 years, for sure, we can see this divided picture on RVs for BEVs when it comes to more modern generations versus older BEVs.
Maybe if I could add here, you can always check out our monthly market update on Autovista24, where we give our view on the answer to exactly that question and how it evolves month by month. Yeah, so it's called monthly market update. It's a Tableau chart and a bit of narrative around it, and it shows how our views change over time on this particular question.
And you can subscribe to the Autovista24 daily newsletter email to make sure that you don't miss it. And that's free. Just go to autovista24.com, scroll to the bottom of the page and just fill in your details. Perfect opportunity to say that. Okay, next question. Are we expecting classic brands such as Volkswagen, Mercedes and BMW will overtake Tesla, for example, with their volumes? Roland, perhaps you could speak about it one?
Yeah, we've been investigating this bottom up, taking into account future portfolios and the strength of their brand in this sector. Going through 2026, we could still state Tesla will lead globally. I don't have the exact numbers for Europe now, but globally Tesla is going to lead at least to until 2026, probably a couple of years after that, with Volkswagen a close second.
Okay.
And maybe just to add a comment here, it's not just because of historical strength, but also because of strength in connectivity and software solutions, in the way the car is built around software rather than hardware. So there are several factors that play a role here to enable Tesla to just continue to be quite strong.
Okay, next question to the panel. How concerned are you about a potential review of taxation policies and the impact on EV sales? Is the current level of sales a false economy given the current incentives? Christoph, would you like to take that on?
I didn't catch the second part of the question. Phil, could you rephrase?
Yep. Is the current level of sales a false economy given current incentives?
Okay. So I think the incentives are actually helping. Yeah, the industrial policy we have in place is helping the market to understand what the sweet point is, or the sweet price is. The sweet spot is for pricing an electric vehicle, and eventually the incentives will be phased out, and hopefully, scale efficiency will be strong enough so that list prices can come down. I mean, that would be an ideal scenario from many perspectives. But if it doesn't happen overnight, if it doesn't happen very fast, I think the industrial policy that is in place in a lot of markets in Europe, in a lot of countries, will soften the blow. So I don't expect that the incentives are giving us any false sense of security, other than that they ideally should come down as list prices come down. Yeah, so I expect stability in the industrial policy going forward, and that's a good thing for the industry in transition.
Maybe I also could add that there is yearly surveys that goes exactly on this question, going out to electric car owners, and the question is, would you buy an electric car next time you will looking for a new car? And the overwhelming answer is yes. So once you go L, you never go back. That seems to be the melody.
Now, this is quite another interesting question. How is the semiconductor shortages affecting the residual value for young used cars? And is this a similar effect across different powertrains? Obviously, we know that there's an impact with the semiconductor shortage across the industry. So how is that affecting the RV for young used cars? Robert, again, can I come to you for that one?
Yes, so obviously this is a big topic now, as we have this shortage and supply issues on the new car deliveries and new car markets. Many buyers now turn to used car markets and look on the used car markets for alternatives. And with the undersupply currently on the used car markets, be it for really young cars, but also for older cars, the range of alternatives is not so high. And this leads to rising asking prices. We have seen this quite impressively on the chart for diesel and petrol cars. If you split this graph by car age, we can see in many markets that specifically really young cars are affected by those rising asking prices. And also on the other end of the spectrum, older cars or old cars are massively impacted by increasing asking prices. So yes, this effect of a semiconductor shortage and supply issues on new car markets translates into those movements we can observe on used car markets and on RVs.
Excellent, thank you. Gear, one for yourself. How important for the success of battery electric vehicles was it that there is no actual car manufacturer based in Norway?
Oh, that's a hypothetical question. Actually a bit difficult. I don't really see that as an effect. If we had a manufacturer, I guess it only would have strengthened it, and most likely, given the situation that we have on how we produce the electricity, that we use water for most of the electricity we produce, I guess that we would have been an early adapter anyway, if we had or didn't have a manufacturing concept on cars. But interesting to elaborate about.
And Christoph, maybe you could answer this one. How long do you think that EU governments will continue to offer and be able to afford incentivizing EV purchases?
Yeah, again, if we all believe that there is a strong industrial policy in place, and I think we all believe that, there are 1,000 levers that you can pull to put that industrial policy in action and to bring it to life. I think the biggest challenge at the moment is for the industry, for the car manufacturers to scale the technology so fast that they can bring down list prices while keeping margins up. Yeah, so as I said, something like 20-25% list price reduction with growing ranges, suitability of daily use rising. I mean, that's a target that the industry needs to achieve, and then the the industrial policy can soften a bit around incentives. If that's not happening, or if that's not happening fast enough, the only way out of the dilemma is to make ICE driving more expensive. And again, there we have a question of will that be acceptable, right, for societies, for people, for voters, to pay more money for mobility. So I guess the big question mark is, can the industry scale enough to lower list prices, and that would be the scenario that we are all looking forward. But if that doesn't happen, there will be other ways to make the transformation happening, which are not so favorable.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to call it our last question. That's the end of our 10-minute session on our Q&A. We've had a lot of questions come in. I will be passing the questions over to our panel, and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible. So if you have submitted a question, then do feel free to, or do expect a response from us. So, as I said, that's the end of our session. We will put the details of our speakers up on screens, the email addresses, if you do have any further questions going forward. But I would like to thank Christoph, Roland, Geir and Robert for joining me. And just to make you also aware of Autovista Group's residual value intelligence, which gives you detailed information that can help you to steer your business through these changing times for the automotive industry. The tool allows you to review trends and gives real context to an analysis by interrogating dashboards on 5 big markets, 14 vehicle segments, 7 fuel types and 38 brands. To find out more and to request a free 7-day trial, please contact Tim Budgeon, whose details are also on screen. And don't forget to sign up to check out Autovista24 at autovista24.com, what I'm sure you will have already, and sign up to the free daily newsletter where you can get more of our data-driven articles, analysis of topics, and of course keep up to date with our upcoming webinar schedule. But thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you on our next webinar.